Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our topic today is case study research. What is a case study? A case study is a specific instance that is frequently designed to illustrate a more general principle. It is the study of an instance in action. The single instance is of a bounded system, for example, a child, a clique, a class, a school, a community. It provides a unique example of real people in real situations, enabling readers to understand ideas more clearly than simply by presenting them with abstract theories or principles. Indeed, a case study can enable readers to understand how ideas and abstract principles can fit together. Case studies penetrate situations in ways that are not always susceptible to numerical analysis. As Robson remarks, case studies opt for analytic rather than statistical generalization. That is, they develop a theory which can help researchers to understand other similar cases, phenomena, or situations. Case studies can establish cause and effect. Indeed, one of their strengths is that they observe effects in real context, recognizing that context is a powerful determinant of both causes and effects. As Nisbat and Watt remark, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Sturman argues that a distinguishing feature of case studies is that human systems have a wholeness or integrity to them rather than being a loose connection of traits necessitating in-depth investigation. Further, contexts are unique and dynamic, hence case studies investigate and report the complex dynamic and unfolding interactions of events, human relationships, and other factors in a unique instance. So, what are the key features of a case study? Well, a case study is concerned with a rich and vivid description of events relevant to the case. It provides a chronological narrative of events relevant to the case. It blends a description of events with the analysis of them. It focuses on individual actors or groups of actors and seeks to understand their perceptions of events. It highlights specific events that are relevant to the case. The researcher is integrally involved in the case, and an attempt is made to portray the richness of the case in writing up the report. Case studies are set in temporal, geographical organizational, institutional, and other contexts that enable boundaries to be drawn around the case. They can be defined with reference to characteristics defined by individuals and groups involved, and they can be defined by participants' roles and functions in the case. So case studies will have temporal characteristics which help to define their nature. They have geographical parameters allowing for their definition. They will have boundaries which allow for definition, may be defined. They may be defined by an individual in a particular context at a point in time, and they may be defined by the characteristics of the group, or they may be defined by role or their function, or they may be shaped by organizational or institutional arrangements. So, what is a case study? In sum, a case study is a specific, a holistic, often unique instance that is frequently designed to illustrate a more general principle. So it is specific and it is holistic overall, not a discrete point, and it often takes a unique phenomena or a situation, and from there it develops certain general principles. Case study is the study of an instance in action, like action research, in a real situation, everyday context. The study of an evolving situation. Case studies portray what it is like to be in a particular situation, and case studies often include direct observations of the participant and non-participant. Well, case studies can be conducted in both cases. Either the researcher becomes a part of the situation where he will be a participant researcher, or it can be non-participatory, as we discussed with reference to observations. And case studies may also include interviews. So case studies strive to portray what it is like to be in a particular situation, to catch the close-up reality and thick description of participants' lived experiences of, thoughts about, and feelings of a situation. So that deals with the real experiences of the participants or the researched, and their real ideas and feelings about a particular phenomena or a situation. So the case studies involve looking at a case. In a case study research, a researcher or the researchers involve looking at a case or a phenomena in its real context, real life context, usually employing many types of data. They are descriptive and detailed with a narrow focus, combining subjective and objective data. So that is a blend of subjective and objective data it is important in case studies for events and situations to be allowed to speak for themselves rather than to be largely interpreted, evaluated, or judged by the researchers, especially in the positivistic or quantitative paradigms. In this respect, the case study is like to a television documentary. This is not to say that case studies are unsystematic or merely illustrative. Case study data are gathered systematically and rigorously indeed. Nisbat and Watt 1984 specifically counseled case study researchers to avoid the following. Number one, journalism. And by journalism they mean that picking out most striking features of the case, thereby distorting the full account in order to emphasize these more sensational aspects. So these need to be avoided, that is journalistic approach. Number two, selective reporting. Selecting only that evidence which will only support a particular conclusion, thereby misrepresenting the whole case. And number three, an anecdotal style, degenerating into an endless series of low-level, banal, and tedious illustrations that take over from in-depth, rigorous analysis. Number four, that is related with the stakes wry comment that our scrapbooks are full of enlargements of enlargements, alluding to the tendency of some case studies to overemphasize detail to the detriment of seeing the whole picture. And number five, that is a pomposity, striving to derive or generate profound theories from low-level data, or by wrapping up accounts in high-sounding verbiage. And number seven, blandness, unquestioningly accepting only the respondents' views, or including only those aspects of the case study on which people agree, rather than areas on which they might disagree. So these are the 7 points which should be avoided by the researchers using case study as a research design data collection tool. So case studies can make theoretical statements, but like other forms of research and human sciences, these must be supported by the evidence presented. This requires the nature of generalization in case study to be clarified. Generalization can take various forms. For example, case studies can make theoretical statements, but like other forms of research and human sciences, case studies must be supported by the evidence presented. This requires the nature of generalization in case study to be clarified. So the generalization can take various forms. For example, some of them have been reported in Simon 1996, who argues that case study needs to address 6 puzzles or paradoxes. It needs to do number one, reject the subject-object dichotomy, regarding all participants equally. Number two, recognize the contribution that a genuine and creative encounter can make to new forms of understanding education. And number three, regard different ways of seeing as new ways of knowing. And number four, approximate the ways of the artist. And number five, free the mind of traditional analysis. And number six, embrace these paradoxes with an overriding interest in people. Now we move on to different types of case studies. There are several types of case studies, and ENG505 identifies three such types in terms of their outcomes. Number one is exploratory, and it is a kind in which it is mostly used as a pilot to other studies or research questions. It explores the possible research questions, and initially it could be beneficial, important for the researchers if they want to explore what are the possible topics which can be developed for the research. Second is descriptive, and the purpose of descriptive type of case study is providing narrative accounts. And number three is an explanatory, a kind of case study which basically tests theories. Exploratory case studies that act as a pilot or piloting can be used to generate hypotheses that are tested in larger scale surveys, experiments, or other forms of research, for example, observational research. However, Edelman et al. 1980 caution against using case studies solely as preliminaries to other studies, for example, as pre-experimental or pre-survey. Rather, they argue case studies exist in their own right as a significant and legitimate research method, so they should not only be used as supplementary or exploratory type which work as preliminaries to other studies. They should be taken as independent and significant legitimate research method themselves. In 1985 classifies, or his classification matches with Merriam 88, who identifies three types again, that is descriptive, means narrative accounts, interpretive, developing contextual categories inductively in order to examine initial or primary assumptions, and evaluative, explaining and judging. Merriam also categorizes four common domains or kinds of case study, and they are ethnographic, historical, psychological, and sociological. Sturman, echoing Stenhouse, identifies four kinds of case study: an ethnographic case study, single in-depth study, action research case study, evaluative case study, an educational case study. And Stake identifies three main types of case study, that is intrinsic case study, studies that are undertaken in order to understand the particular case in question, that is intrinsic. Instrumental case studies, and their purpose is examining a particular case in order to gain insight into an issue or a theory. And collective case studies, the purpose is groups of individual studies that are undertaken to gain a fuller picture. Because case studies provide fine-grained detail, they can also be used to complement other, more coarsely grained, often large-scale kinds of research. Robson suggests that there are an individual case study, a set of individual case studies, a social group study, studies of organizations and institutions, studies of events, roles, and relationships. All of these, he argues, find expression in the case study method. He adds to these distinction between a critical case study and an extreme or unique case. The former, he argues, is when theoretical understanding is such that there is a clear, unambiguous, and non-trivial set of circumstances where predicted outcomes will be found. Finding a case which fits and demonstrating what has been predicted can give a powerful boost to knowledge and understanding. So let's move on the next stage, where we'll discuss what are the strengths and weaknesses of case studies. Case studies have several claimed strengths and weaknesses, and they can be summarized as: the results are more easily understood by a wide audience, including non-academics, as case studies are frequently written in everyday non-professional language. Case studies are immediately intelligible. They speak for themselves. Case studies catch unique features that may otherwise be lost in larger scale data like surveys or questionnaires. These unique features might hold the key to understanding the situation. They are strong on reality. They are conducting real life situations. They provide insights into other similar situations and cases, thereby assisting interpretation of other similar cases. They can be undertaken by a single researcher without needing a full research team, and they can embrace and build in unanticipated events and uncontrolled variables. Well, these are some of their strong points, but they are not without some weak points. So what are their weaknesses? Well, the results of the case studies may not be generalizable except where other readers or researchers see their application. Similar situation, similar results can be transferred, but they cannot be generalized as in a positivistic type of research methods. Then case studies are not easily open to cross-checking. Hence, They may be selective, biased, personal, and subjective. They are prone to problems of observer bias despite attempts made to address reflexivity. So, what are some of the components or elements of our case study? Let's catch that. What I started with, that the case studies are rich, vivid, and holistic description. That is a thick description term by Geertz, and they are the portrayal of events, contexts, and situations through the eyes of participants, including the researcher. Contexts are temporal, physical, organizational, institutional, interpersonal. They could be any of these. And chronological narrative, combination of description, analysis, and interpretation, focus on actors and participants, and they let the data speak for themselves. Don't over-interpret. So, types of case studies can be summarized that they are exploratory. Mostly their function is for piloting. They could be the preliminary for some other type of rigorous research. They could be descriptive, a narrative account, and they can be explanatory. And Stake says or adds to some more types of case study. Intrinsic case studies, and their purpose is to understand the case in question, and instrumental case studies, purpose is examining a particular case to gain insight into an issue or theory. And then there are collective case studies, where groups of individual studies to gain a fuller picture. Case studies frequently follow the interpretative tradition of research, or post-positivistic we discussed, seeing the situation through the eyes of participants rather than the quantitative paradigm or positivistic paradigm. Though this need not always be the case, its sympathy to the interpretive paradigm has rendered case study an object of criticism. Consider, for example, Smith, 91, who argues that not only is the case study method the logically weakest method of knowing, but also studying individual cases, careers, and communities is a thing of the past, and that attention should be focused on patterns and laws in historical research. What about the issues of reliability and validity in case study? Like other research methods, case study has to demonstrate reliability and validity. This can be difficult, for given the uniqueness of situations, they may be by definition inconsistent with other case studies, or unable to demonstrate this positivist view of reliability. Even though case studies do not have to demonstrate this form of reliability, nevertheless, there are important questions to be faced in undertaking case studies. For example, how are cases identified and selected? What exactly is a case? What kind of case study is this? Well, these are some of the questions which a researcher answer or think before going on or choosing a case study as a research method. So what kind of case study is this? What is its purpose? Why the researcher wants to do it? What would be the reliable evidence for that one? And what is objective evidence? What is an appropriate selection to include from the wealth of generated data? What is a fair and accurate account? Under what circumstances is it fair to take an exceptional case? What kind of a sampling is most appropriate? And to what extent is triangulation required? And how will this be addressed? What is the nature of the validation process in case studies? How will the balance be struck between uniqueness and generalization? And what is the most appropriate form of writing up and reporting the case study? What ethical issues are exposed in undertaking a case study? So a key issue in case study research is the selection of information. Although it is frequently useful to record typical representative occurrences, the researcher need not always adhere to criteria of representativeness. It may be that infrequent, unrepresentative but critical incidents or events occur that are crucial to the understanding of the case. For example, a subject only demonstrates a particular behavior once, but it is so important as not to be ruled out simply because it occurred once. Sometimes a single event might occur which shares a hugely important insight into a person or situation. It can be a key to understanding a situation. For example, it may be that a psychological case study might happen upon a single instance of child abuse earlier in an adult's life, but the effects of this were so profound as to constitute a turning point in understanding that adult. A child might suddenly pass a single comment that indicates complete frustration or complete fear of a teacher, yet it is too important to overlook. Case studies is not having to seek frequencies of occurrences, can replace quantity with quality and intensity, separating the significant few from the insignificant many instances of behavior. Significance rather than frequency is a hallmark of case studies, offering the researcher an insight into the real dynamics of situation and people. Let's look at some examples of kinds of case studies. Unlike the experimenter who manipulates variables to determine their causal significance, or the surveyor who asks standardized questions of large representative samples of individuals, the case study researcher typically observes the characteristics of an individual unit, say a child, a clique, a class, a school, or a community. The purpose of such observation is to probe deeply and to analyze intensively the multifarious phenomena that constitute the life cycle of the unit, with a view to establishing generalizations about the wider population to which that unit belongs. So antipathy among researchers towards statistical experimental paradigm has created something of a boom industry in case study as well. So there would be many studies like delinquents, Patrick 73, and dropouts, Parker 74, and drug users, Young 71, and schools, King 1979. They all attest to the wide use of the case study in contemporary social sciences and educational research. Such wide use is marked by an equally diverse range of techniques employed in the collection and analysis of both qualitative and quantitative data. So whatever the problem or the approach, at the heart of every case study lies a method of observation and a typology of observation studies on the basis of which 6 examples have been reported in literature. Acres 1990 study is an ethnographic account that is based on several hundred hours of participant observation material, while Bolton 1992 work, by contrast, is based on highly structured non-participant observation conducted over 5 years. The study by Wild et al. 1992 used participant observation, loosely structured interviews that yielded simple frequency counts. And Bliss and Cohen's 1990 study of coping with computer-used highly structured observation schedules undertaken by non-participant observers with the express intention of obtaining precise quantitative data on the classroom use of a computer program. So this part of a longitudinal study in primary classrooms yielded typical profiles of individual behavior and group interaction in students' usage of the computer program. And Antonson's 88 study was of a single child undergoing psychotherapy at a child psychiatric unit. It uses unstructured observation within the artificial setting of a psychiatric clinic and is a record of the therapy's non-directive approach. And finally, Houghton's 1991 study uses data from structured sets of test materials together with focus interviews with those with whom this international student had contact. So there is a vast range of methods and types of case studies which have been reported in literature on case studies. So that can be presented in a diagram, a typology of observation studies. You can see degree of structure imposed by observer is criteria on the one hand, and you have unstructured and structured type of information you get, and on the one hand you have the natural setting, and on the other extreme is the artificial one. So the degree of structure in the observational setting will determine the type of observation or the study. The studies which I just discussed are summarized in this diagram. The first was Acre 1990, where the teacher's culture in an English primary school was the focus. That is cell number 1 here, and that is towards a natural setting. Whereas and it was unstructured. In cell number 2, you can put, you see, a structured, that is Bolton 92, participation in a playground activities. In cell number 3, that would be in the middle between structured and unstructured, so wild, that is evaluating information technology. And the case number 4, in cell number 4, is also the case study number 4, that was Blees and Cohen 1990, that was coping with computers. And number 5, Anson 88, treatment of a boy of 12 years old. And the last one, number 6, was Houghton's 1991, Mr. Chong, a case study of a dependent learner. So 5 or 6, they are towards the artificial settings more, and 1 and 2 towards the natural setting. So you classify different types of case studies according to whether they are structured or they are unstructured, and the second point, whether they are in natural settings or they are a bit artificial settings. Well, what are the case study and the problems of selection? Among the issues confronting the researcher at the outset of the case study are the problems of selection. The following questions indicate some of the obstacles in this respect. For example, how do you get from the initial idea to the working design, from the idea to a specification to usable data? Number 2, what do you lose in the process? And number 3, what unwanted concerns do you take on board as a result? And number 4, how do you find a site which provides the best location for the design? And number 5, how do you locate, identify, and approach key informants? And number 6, how they see you creates a context within which you see them. How can you handle such social complexities? And number 7, how do you record evidence? When do you record it, and how much you record it? And number 8, how do you file and categorize it? And number 9, how much time do you give to thinking and reflecting about what you are doing? And number 10, at what points do you show your subject what you are doing? And number 11, at what points do you give them control over who sees what? And 12, who sees the report first? So these are certain points which you need to make a decision and consider before you take your case studies as a research method. Now, how can you make or how can you plan a case study? And what is involved in planning a case study? Well, in planning a case study, there are several issues that researchers may find useful to consider, and they have been reported by Edelman 1980. The particular circumstances of the case, including the possible disruption to individual participants, that participation might entail negotiating access to people, negotiating ownership of the data, and negotiating release of the data. The conduct of the study, including the use of primary and secondary sources, the opportunities to check data, triangulation, including peer examination of the findings, respondent validation, and reflexivity, data collection methods in the interpretative paradigm. Case studies tend to use certain data collection methods, for example, semi-structured and open interviews, observation, narrative accounts and documents, diaries, maybe also tests rather than other methods, for example, surveys or experiments. Nisbet and Watt suggest that in conducting interviews, it may be wiser to interview senior people later rather than earlier, so that the most effective use of discussion time can be made, the interviewer having been put into the picture fully before the interview. Finally, the conduct of research involves data analysis, theory generation where appropriate, and writing the report. Nisbet and Watt suggest that it is important to separate conclusions from the evidence, with the essential evidence included in the main text, and to balance illustration with analysis and generalization. So you can look at this diagram, that is a continuum of data collection, types and analysis in case study type of research. Well, you see that there are three columns. On the first column you have unstructured field notes, and second type you have a narrative field notes, and the third you have a journalistic or impressionistic. You have two extremes, you see, on the left unstructured field notes, and on the right you will see structured notes like surveys and census data. And how will be data collection? The arrow shows, you see, that could be both ways in case studies. So there could be interviews open to closed. So if it would be open one, that would be unstructured, and if it is very close, it would be structured. In data collection, you approach, and your approach decides what type of case studies there would be. Then data types. It would be coded, qualitative data, and non-parametric statistics. And it would be towards narrative, or it may be towards numeric, where you would use ratio scale data and frequencies. So that would be towards a structured or controlled type of case study, and where it is a narrative and footnotes would be towards a qualitative and interpretative type of case study. Then data analysis. There is a content analysis. If it is a journalistic type of or a impressionistic type of analysis, that would be one extreme, and the other would be more dominant, or it would be based on statistical or inferential statistics. So that would be more structured and like positivistic method approach. So at one pole we have unstructured, typically qualitative data, while at the other we have structured, typically quantitative data. Researcher using case study approaches will need to decide which method of data collection, which type of data and technique techniques of analysis to employ. Then comes the stage of writing up a case study. The writing up a case study abides by the twin notions of fitness for purpose and fitness for audience. And Robinson suggests 6 forms of organizing the writing up of a case study. So in the suspense structure, that is number 1, the author presents the main findings, for example, an executive summary in the opening part of the report, and then devotes the remainder of the report to providing evidence, analysis, explanations, justifications, for example, what is selected in or out, what conclusions are drawn, what alternative explanations are rejected, and argument that leads to the overall picture of our conclusion. In the narrative report, a prose account is provided, and it is interspersed with relevant figures, tables, emergent issues, analysis, and conclusion. And in the comparative structure, the same case is examined through 2 or more lenses, like explanatory, descriptive, and theoretical mixed, in order either to provide a rich, all-round account of the case, or to enable the reader to have sufficient information from which to judge which of the explanations, descriptions, or theories best fit the data. In the chronological structure or organization of a case study, a simple sequence or chronology is used as the organizational principle, thereby enabling not only cause and effect to be addressed, but also possessing the strength of an ongoing story. Adding to Robson's comments, the chronology can be sectionalized as appropriate, for example, key events or key time frames, and intersperse commentaries on interpretations of and explanations for, and summaries of emerging issues as events unfold, like memoing in ethnographic research. The chronology becomes an organizing principle, but different kinds of contents are included at each stage of the chronological sequence. In the theory-generating structure of a case study, the structure follows a set of theoretical constructs or a case that is being made. And in this scenario, Robson suggests each succeeding section of the case study contributes to or constitutes an element of a developing theoretical formulation, providing a link in the chain of argument, leading eventually to the overall theoretical formulation. And in the unsequenced structure, the sequence, for example, chronological, issue-based, event-based, theory-based, is unimportant. Some case studies are of a single situation, a single child, a single social group, a single class, a single school. Here, any of the above 6 approaches may be appropriate. Some case studies require an unfolding of events. Some case studies operate under a snapshot approach, for example, of several schools or classes or groups at a particular point in time. In the former, it may be important to preserve the chronology, whereas in the latter such a chronology may be irrelevant. Some case studies are divided into two main parts: the data reporting and then the analysis, interpretation and explanation. So the different strategies illustrated in 6 examples of case studies in a variety of educational settings suggest that participant observation is best thought of as a generic term that describes a methodological approach rather than one specific method. What the examples have shown is that the representativeness of a particular sample often relates to the observational strategy open to the researcher. Generally speaking, the larger the sample, the more representative it is, and the more likely that the observer's role is of a participant nature. Well, that was about the case study, and it is based on a number of books, and they are given here for further reading. So first of all is Bessie M, a case study research in educational settings from Open University Press, and the second is Burton D. and Bartlett 2004, practitioner research for teachers, and Graham B., case study research methods, London, and published by Continuum, and Yin R. 2003, case study research, design and methods, 3rd edition. And you can add one chapter from research methods in education by Cohen and Mannion. These are the works on which today's lecture was based, and I hope that you will read further to make an effort to understand the subject as a case study, and if you are going to use it as a research method for your own project. So case study is one of the data collection tools and a method of research which falls under the category of post-positivistic approach, and it is linked with the ethnographic type of research, where the research is conducted within a context, and its purpose is to study one unit, one organization in depth, collect the data and interpret it. And case studies have different types, as we have studied, and we have discussed in this lecture types of case studies. Depends on whether they are structured or unstructured, whether they use interviews or field notes or some kind of an analysis of a phenomena. Well, that is all about case studies, and we have reached towards the end of today's lecture. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye till the next lecture.